Um, I think this is in memory of Professor Mathew, and I certainly would like to take 3-4 minutes maximum. I think I'll come over there. Does that work? Well, good afternoon again. A medical teacher of Trivandrum Medical College, to be fondly remembered after 28 years after his demise, is certainly unusual. In fact, I am indeed very glad that I am here to briefly mention about my mentor, my teacher, my colleague, later my close friend from 1962 onwards. Most of the people here might not have been born at that time. Actually, this is a story of hard work, of a village urchin who was born in Koranjeri way back in 1932 and stepped into the portals of Trivandrum Medical College when there were hardly 60 seats available in the whole of Kerala, to shine among his peers and among his teachers, not only in the scholastic performance but also in the sports field, was very unusual at that time. He represented the University of Kerala and the state in sports field when nobody cared two hoots about his achievement. That was his lot. When he passed his MBBS with flying colors, actually he wanted to be in the Department of Medicine. As luck would have it, he had no godfather, had to work alone, and then he was shunted to the Department of Pathology as a lowly tutor, lowly demonstrator in pathology. Every Tom, Dick and Harry who had somebody there could join in the clinical departments then. But his dismay in joining the Department of Pathology is changed to a delight, in the sense that he took his DCP, Diploma in Clinical Pathology, the first person in the University of Kerala to have taken that. Taking DCP didn't give him any benefit. He desperately wanted to be in the Department of Medicine, which was denied to him then also. It was then the MD medicine course was started in the department, and the first batch of students, both of them, failed miserably to cover the exam. And Mathew belonged to the second batch. He, with practically no teaching worth mentioning, he crossed the Rubicon with no difficulty with his own effort. You'd be surprised that passing MD, and when there is an acute scarcity of medical teachers in the Department of Medicine, he was denied the post of a tutor in medicine even then. You can't believe that he was shunned to Department of Surgical Pediatrics. He worked there. It was by luck an old, very determined, very kind person became the principal for a few days. It was he who transferred Mathew to the Department of Medicine. That was in 1962, when we were students, and we loved this gentleman for his expertise, his great capacity, great command of language, and his depth of knowledge. In fact, he did not do well because his bosses didn't allow him to do well, till he joined Dr. K.N. Pai's unit, the great man. By the time I did my post-graduation and joined in as a colleague to Dr. Mathew, I came to know the depth of his knowledge and the width of his knowledge by working with him. In fact, his problem was that he was confined his entire work to this local place and got it scattered also. He was the first person in this part of the world to started the concept of sports medicine. He left it. He was the first secretary of the Cardiological Society of India, again Kerala chapter. He was the first secretary of the Association of Physicians of India, again Kerala chapter. When he could have shown well in the national arena with no difficulty whatsoever. He was a true disciple to his mentor, Dr. K.N. Pai, and people flocked to him, and he was the most sought after doctor. Actually, it gave him a lot of fame, but at the same time, he took a lot of time as well. In the last time, he became the professor of endocrinology. By the time, his fame spread all over India. And by the time he started moving to the Association of Physicians of India, and the last was in Madurai session way back in 1987. Both of us opposed, and he came back, well, to time. I don't think there is no teacher who is so fondly remembered by the students. I am so grateful that I got an opportunity to talk about Dr. Mathew. In fact, I thank Dr. Jyoti also to keep his memory all the time alive. Dr. Jyoti, may I hand over to you something which you may like. This is about Dr. Mathew. Dr. Joshi, I was involved in API for a long time, though I moved out in neurology. In fact, I still continue in API in all my heart and all my work. Thank you very much for time. And this is about Dr. Mathew. Thank you. Okay. Dr. Joshi, please.
At the onset, I would like to thank Professor Rajasekharan Nair for the kind words for J.C. Mathew and my good friend Jyoti Dev, who gave me a very unique topic this time. He said, discoveries in diabetes or diabetes and lipids, what have we Indians contributed? And actually, Dr. Jyoti Dev himself has become the social media face of India. And he is trying to integrate telemedicine, telediabetology. Okay, because whenever I call Dr. Jyoti Dev, you cannot get him on phone. You can get him on Facebook, you can get him on email, you can get him on SMS. And one day he's in Muscat, next day he's in Dubai, third day he's in Cochin, and fourth day he's in Thiruvananthapuram. So I told him that he's really the mobile diabetology, and he's really started this whole innovative concept. And I wish that you would now do this whole symposium also live, like a webinar. So what I'm going to do in the next 15, 20, 30 minutes, I do have some conflict of interest, but for this talk I don't have any, okay, is what is Indian diabetes? And if you look at the gradient of burden for prevalence of diabetes, whether it's the village, whether it's town, whether it's the Chennai city, this is Ramchandran's data, very clearly you can see the diabetes gradient has moved from the village at 9% to 16% in towns to Chennai. And what has moved with that gradient, very typically, is that the BMI above 25 has moved up, or obesity, and more critically what has moved up is the abdominal obesity. So we really, as Indians, have moved the gradient from the village to the town to the city. As we have migrated, as we have urbanized, we have developed obesity, we have developed abdominal obesity, we have developed diabetes. We did a site study which we published from 8 states of India with more than 16,000 people, again the same thing. Primary care doctors, when they saw hypertension or diabetes, 86% of the patients had truncal obesity, and 73% of patients were either overweight or obese by the new BMI criteria. When we did the ICMR INDIAB study, which Dr. Mohan is the principal investigator, I was investigator from Maharashtra state, and I published this study with him, with Anjana, on dyslipidemia. In urban and rural Indians, we found that 79% of Indians had one lipid abnormality with diabetes. 77 in Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu 76%, Jharkhand 80%, Chandigarh 82%. And only a small percentage had no abnormality, 1 in 5. But the bigger challenge was, the biggest lipid abnormality we had was low HDL, followed by high triglycerides, followed by cholesterol, the typical triad. And we have a very particular phenotype. We have familial and a lot of aggregation of type 2 diabetes, lower age of onset, lower threshold for BMI, a lot of insulin resistance. We are thin fat because we have a lot of abdominal fat. We have a lot of inflammation in CRP, visceral fat, low adiponectin, and therefore premature heart disease and diabetes is very common in our population. So we are thin fat Indians, we have more fat, less muscle, we have sarcopenia, sarcosis muscle and abdominal obesity, and we are sedentary and we are affluent. So that's really what we are. And obviously Indian diet has been always a challenge because we had a lot of geographic and ethnic variations. Because food cooked in every Indian household is different. And therefore, we didn't have a pan-India study we published last year in the BMJ, whether you look at non-diabetics or diabetics. It is just not South India which has all the carbs. Whether it's Central India, Western India, Northern India, Eastern India, all of us, we are a carbohydrate fat country with less of proteins. That's really true whether you're diabetics or non-diabetic, and that's what we published last year in the BMJ. The other problem is we are sedentary Indians. This is Dr. Mohan's data, clearly showing if you are a heavy worker, your prevalence of diabetes is 5%. If you are a light worker, it is 17%. And its primary culprit is all this technology. Dr. Jyoti Dev is using technology to the advantage of education and patient care management, but television viewing probably promotes inactivity. And the other problem is we have this problem of non-exercise activity thermogenesis. When we look at burning of fat, exercise forms a very small component, only 1/3. But we have a big component of non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So we have become very chair bound. We are doing seated work, not moving, very sedentary. And agrarian Indian, which had a NEAT of around 2000, has moved to a sedentary Indian of around 700. And that real switch has made all this diabetes. So do Indians need lower dose? Do we respond better to a lower dose? Do we have really ethnic variations? Are there genetic difference in polymorphisms? Because we are thin fat, we have a different pancreatic pathophysiology. Well, we do respond better to alpha glucosidase inhibitors. Very clear data. We definitely respond better to gliptins. And we do have some genomic traits. We do have a larger load on L cells. Our incretin response is better. So what about some foods, functional foods? For example, one big question I am always asked whenever I talk on diabetes and lipids is, which oil do you use in India? The NIN clearly says now that no single oil is adequate. And this is an Indian innovation now, that you can combine 2 or more vegetable oils. For example, in this part of the world, there will be coconut oil or sesame oil. Now, is it sufficient? Does it have low sat fat? Does it have some PUFA, some MUFA? Because you need a balance of all the three, and we need to blend it. So if you look at all the edible oils, like a canola oil will have too much of a oleic acid, omega-3. Or if you look at an olive oil, it will have a lot of omega-3. Or if you look at a safflower oil, it will have a lot of omega-6. And you need to have the right balance. Or coconut oil will have a lot of sat fat. You need to balance out these oils. Can we really do that? Can we innovate it? So the blending is a need of the hour. You can do physical and chemical blending. No single oil has ideal fatty acid ratio, taste, aroma. And the other problem in India is we fry food. So we can do blending. And Indian regulators now allow blending. Just like we do insulin 30-70, we can do 30-70 or 20-80 of blending, and you can prevent degradation during cooking in vivo, and therefore there can be a synergy of that oil. The first blending came from Japan. Okay, Sugano published this data where he blended RBO with safflower, and now a lot of Indian innovators have actually made this oil stable during frying, and you can see some of that data which I'm doing. They also have got a technology so that it doesn't get absorbed. If you look at a soya bean or a canola, it gets absorbed very fast. But now if you blend an RBO with safflower, it doesn't get absorbed. So we did a randomized double-blind parallel group proof of concept study with a blended oil. And what we found that LDL goes down, the total cholesterol goes down, triglycerides go down, oxidized LDL goes down, HSCRP goes down, homocysteine goes down. So obviously, if you blend oils and have less oils, you can see an Indian discovery which can be a reality. The other Indian discovery which has always been thought, when you talk of Indian discovery, has been contribution to hypertension by Reserpine, by Rustam Jal Vakil and his colleagues. We all know Reserpine was isolated in 1952 from a dried root of an Indian snake root. It was Sarpagandha, and it was used for centuries for treating insanity and fever and snake bites, but obviously it had its use for a very long time, almost for 3 decades, on mild essential hypertension and also for relief of agitation from psychotic states. And obviously it stayed for a long time. It had a lot of clinical pharmacology. Of course, better drugs came in, and this drug had a lot of side effects, so it's rarely used today. The other thing which came from India, we all know chloroquine. We also know chloroquine has been useful, very useful now in rheumatoid arthritis. It has been useful in malaria, but very recently the Indian FDA used it, and some people in the south, particularly from CMC, documented very nicely that hydrochloroquine can be used in diabetes. They did a randomized double-blind study on type 2 diabetes, and they ensured that the A1C, fasting and PP sugars dropped down very rapidly. Another Indian now, I would not say technically Indian, it's an Indo-Chinese discovery, a traditional Chinese medicine called berberine. It is the farmer's herb root classic, and it has a typical salt of alkaloid, and it is very useful to suppress E-selectin. It's called berberine. It's very useful in type 2 diabetes, and it's available in India. It's a very good adjuvant to oral anti-diabetic agents. But really, have we really discovered a new chemical entity from India in diabetes? And I think we have one now, and that is called as saroglitazar. It's truly an Indian innovation. Glitazars across the world, every glitazar which came in the market really went out. And it's a dual gamma alpha PPAR agonist, and that's why I'm going to spend some time on it. We all know fibrates activate the alpha receptor. And when they activate the alpha receptor, they lower the triglycerides. So they have an impact on liver and vascular wall. And the glitazones activate the gamma receptors. So can we combine the two? So that the triglycerides go down, the LDL goes down, the HDL goes up, insulin sensitivity improves, inflammation goes down, and the global cardio-diabetic profile comes down. So a lot of glitazars got developed. For example, buraglitazar, but it had to be discontinued. Or the tesaglitazar, which ought to be discontinued, navaglitazar, ragaglitazar, faraglitazar, chiraglitazar, lot of glitazars came in and came out. And obviously, if you look at the PPAR axis, it's a very complex axis. We have the alpha, the beta, the gamma, and they have a very unique way of lowering the free fatty acids and the HDL and the LDL and triglyceride clearance. So saroglitazar is one such compound now available in India for almost 2 years. It's a clearly Indian discovery. It reduces triglycerides, it improves the HDL and lowers the small dense LDL. So for diabetic dyslipidemia, it's truly an Indian discovery, and I think we should be very proud of it. There's a lot of data now available. They did their phase 1 studies, the phase 2 studies, the phase 3 studies, and now we are in the second year of its availability on a phase 4 trial, and they have published a lot of work. The PRESS-5 trial was a randomized double-blind saroglitazar trial which compared head-to-head with 45 milligrams of pioglitazone. So it had a glitazone impact. And it also has shown very clearly that when you compare saroglitazar with pioglitazone, it does work on lowering glucose. And when you look at comparing it with atorvastatin, which was the PRESS-6 study, which was also published, you can see here very clearly that saroglitazar has an impact on triglyceride reduction, and it's pretty safe. It has some side effects, but they are almost minimal, and it's very well tolerated. And when in 2015, now with more than a year available, there was this study of saroglitazar published in Nature. In fact, it was very nice to see from Calcutta group, Sanjay Chatterjee, Anirban Mujumdar and Subir Ray. They published in the scientific reports of Nature the observational study of glucose and lipids from saroglitazar from the Indian population. And very clearly they showed that there was a 56% drop in the triglycerides, and there was an absolute reduction of A1C of around 1%. So it was very, very reassuring that the lipid biology improved, and a journal like Nature showed that saroglitazar had an impact on non-HDL cholesterol, which was pretty sufficient, and also the glucose came down in a very robust way. Obviously, it was not affecting the kidney, the liver or the body weight, and therefore that was another study which came in. Indian Heart Journal recently reported a study again on saroglitazar in Indian diabetic dyslipidemia. It was a multi-center observational study of more than 2,800 patients which they published, and they showed a robust reduction on glucose parameters, non-HDL cholesterol, and it did not lead to any weight gain like a glitazone. In fact, I published and presented a paper at Nashville in USA for the American Endocrine Society meeting where we had a 9-month data, And subsequently at the American Diabetes meeting, which you can see here, that we presented at Boston in a late breaker poster on 1 year data. So this compound is available. So it's not that Indians do not discover things. I think Indian innovators are here to stay. In the good old days, we never had discoveries from India. We probably always have echoed reserpine, but we are now doing some blending oils and functional foods. We are now discovering compounds like saroglitazar, and obviously this compound is now being investigated by the US FDA and Europe for fatty liver, because we know that this is a big entity which is now affecting our class and has a huge impact on liver disease. So they are looking at this and HIV lipodystrophy. So really, if you look at Indian discovery for diabetics, probably the first new chemical entity from India in this area has been saroglitazar. It's an approved dual PPAR gamma alpha agent. It is approved for diabetic dyslipidemia. It is approved as for high triglycerides in type 2 diabetes not controlled with statin, 4 milligram once a day, and it is clearly having glycemic and lipid benefits. It is pretty safe, no weight gain or edema, renal hepatic function, myopathy or myalgia whenever you combine it with statin. But my last couple of slides should be on prevention. We just can't talk of discoveries, though my oration title is discoveries. I think I'll be failing my duty if I don't talk on prevention, because we are the second largest country in the world with diabetes, and we have to be conscious of the fact that we truly need to change our eating habits. We need to eat less, we need to eat on time, we need to eat right. We need to walk, we need to be physically active, we need to sleep well and on time, and we need to smile. We really need to be physically active. We can't be exercising our fingers on our smartphones or remote controls. We really need to exercise our muscles, and therefore it's important to recognize that. Remember, we have leashed a monster. Prevention strategies should span in our lifetime. And remember that though we are living in best of times with all this technology, and we are also in the worst of times, because we are at the peak of non-communicable diseases epidemic, whether it is diabetes, whether it's hypertension, whether it's heart disease or dyslipidemia, whether it's cognitive dysfunction or dementia, or psychomorbid comorbidities or cancer. We really are in worst of times. Now remember, the whole problem of diabetes is that we are in times of plenty, and our body engines are running in a famine mode. So we need to be active, we need to eat healthy. To stem this epidemic of diabetes, we need to build a strong muscle and efficient mitochondria so that we can be robust in our physical activity. And therefore, I think we must ensure that we change the way we think about prevention. We may have a lot of discoveries. We have to be very proud as Indians that India is changing. We are having a Prime Minister who's very proud of a Made in India and Make in India campaign. But much before he came in power, we had this unique chemical entity from diabetes from India. And I think we are very proud that it is coming from India. And I'm sure that in times to come, people across the world will also use this entity. And I think still, though we'll keep on discovering new and new medicines, we should never forget lifestyle, and we should really never forget our central theme of diabetes prevention. So I think what I have tried to do, in memory of Professor V.C. Mathew, as our illustrious chairperson mentioned, is that we not only need to discover more and more compounds in the field of diabetes, and we definitely will get some of them coming up. We will have a lot of advances from telemedicine and telediabetology. As Dr. Jyoti Dev is at the peak of technology, I told him you are the technological diabetologist of the country. So he will keep on doing that work. But I think the Indian chemists who are very good at reverse engineering, I am certain will now discover more and more compounds which will be useful for our population. Remember, saroglitazar is a drug which is useful for our population because it looks after triglycerides, which is an Indian issue, the HDL, which is again an Indian issue, and glucose, which is also an Asian or Indian issue. So I think we need to discover compounds which are more attuned for our problems. Thank you for a patient hearing.